I think my stepmom killed my dad, and it sickens me how relieved his death made me. My biological father and the woman I called a stepmother, who will be referred to as Kathy, were seemingly a very happy couple. Kathy seemed to be really into my dad, and they had similar views on most things. I had cut contact with my father when I turned 18, with just happy birthday messages filling out chat box. I did want to reconnect one day, but after understanding just how much pain he put my mom and I through, after therapy opened my eyes, it felt wrong to forgive him. To really understand my thoughts, I have to tell you about my father. My father wasn't a good man most of my early childhood. He abused not just my mother and I, but also substances such as alcohol and other illegal items. Most of my mental disorders were a result of him abusing illegal substances while impregnating my mother. My siblings all suffer similar disorders, which showed just how long my father abused these substances. This caused him to do a lot of things he would come to regret. The big one would be not seeking rehab. His inaction to help his addictions led my mother to file for divorce after getting pregnant with my youngest sibling, with him only seeing us sparingly through the months that would pass. I don't blame my father completely for how he turned out. My grandparents were off-the-boat immigrants with a very skewed line of what was discipline and what was abuse, which is a polite way of me saying abuse wasn't in their vocabulary. While my grandfather treasured me, he was an authoritative man with a heavy hand while my father was growing up. My father was best he could be giving his life growing up. He was taught physical action was discipline, and thus used what he learned. It won't ever erase the good things he did, or the happy times we shared. But, I can still recall some night, crying while he would hit us. Or the nights my mom would lay in bed with me, and I would ask, "When will you leave that monster?" He never was home because he worked hours away, and would stay with his mother, my grandmother, on the weekdays. I don't know if it's true, but I highly suspect multiple affairs also took place on those weeknights away. When my mom finally divorced my dad, it felt like a chain was being shattered. My mom was free of his hands every time he drank or used. My dad didn't take the divorce with the same level of optimism. My father would bring home girls every time my siblings and I saw him he was seeing someone else. Until, one visit, the same girl was there. This is where Kathy enters the picture. She was nice to me, but I honestly chalk that up to me actually being able to take care of myself while my younger siblings needed help with food, bathing, and getting dressed. She also had no daughters of her own, so she showed me a lot of things my overprotective mother didn't, small things like how to shave and how to hold a gun. I think my father went to rehab for Kathy, having realized that he didn't want to mess up 2 marriages. He had been doing better before I cut contact. I can remember exactly how I got the news. I was at the mall and talking to a high school friend I hadn't seen in ages. My mom texted me to get home, that it was important. I bid my friend a swift farewell before going home and finding my mother out in the backyard with my aunt and uncle, who were friends with my father before he used substances. And it was there my mom told me my dad had apparently died of a rare genetic disease, information I still don't fully know despite it being crucial information. Kathy had told my grandmother, and word traveled around the family. Now, I know what you think, OP, why do you think your stepmom killed your dad? Well, readers, it's because the circumstances of his death were very suspicious. Not even a few hours before, my dad was posting on his socials about the election and other stuff. The next day, he's dead of some genetic disease that I, having lived my entire 20+ years of life, knew he had? That nobody seemed to have any idea he had? Moreover, Kathy didn't get an autopsy done. And got him cremated literally straight from the hospital. She didn't give us anything about how, when, where, or why he died, no hospital name, no doctor, no funeral or viewing, nothing. The relief I felt from his death makes me feel guilty to this day. My father had a habit of screwing over me and my family, and the fact he could no longer torment us made me just a tiny bit happy. I couldn't care less about inheritance. My father had a habit of draining my savings if he needed money. I didn't want any money at that point. I just found peace in the fact I would no longer fear him coming back to screw over my family. But, a part of me did wonder if perhaps, this was no genetic disease. I would not be surprised if my father start using again and drained some accounts, like the days with my mom. That perhaps Kathy had fallen victim to my dad just as my mom did, and just snapped. But, that seemed unlikely, he had been doing so well. I think Kathy killed my father to get his insurance payout, that in the end, my father met his match with Kathy. That maybe Kathy was the abuser and my dad was the victim, and sweet karma came to collect long-needed debts. What truly solidified my theory was the fact that my elder cousin and I thought the same thing. My cousin and I are like night and day, black and white, sun and moon. We are the complete opposites. So the fact we merely thought the same thing would mean Hades had frozen over. Kathy ended up giving us a box of my father's things, nothing she wanted I guess. It still bothers me that she just disappeared after that, with no explanations or answers. My dad's side of the family didn't like her too much though, so she didn't really have a reason to stick around. I don't blame her for leaving so quickly. If she was in fact in mourning, she would have a lot of things to sort both physically and mentally. Though, sometimes I do have the compulsive urge to try to look her up. Kathy was a crazy woman, and honestly the mystery of my father's sudden illness and demise still ticks at my brain at the ungodly hours of the night. Questions: if your father was in hospital at the time of his death, any valid suspicions would have been raised by the staff prior to cremation. The police would have been informed of any wrongdoing or suspicions the hospital had. They don't just hand over dead bodies. Sorry, but I don't believe it. Answer: it's okay, I know it's pretty far-fetched of a story. And honestly, I tend to overthink a lot. If it does help, Kathy is a nurse, so perhaps her medical knowledge played a part. I don't remember what kind of nurse. All I really remember is she would come pick up my siblings, and I for custody weekends and scrubs, and ranting about the hospital.